If I had known a signature could smell like blood, I'd have at least asked, whose? Rain hammered the city so hard it shaved the neon into ribbons. Sirens knifed through the wet air behind me, high and feral, but I'd already made the last turn that swallowed their light. The bike purred under me like a promise broken on purpose. Gasoline stung my tongue, my forearms hummed with leftover speed. That should have been the end of it. Another midnight run, another clean escape. I cut the engine in the alley behind the old courthouse and swung off. Boots, landing in a splash that sent an oil-slick rainbow skating over black water. I grinned to no one. Then someone cleared his throat, and the grin slid right off. Not cops. 3 men stepped out of the dark wearing raincoats too nice for this weather, and shoes that didn't belong in puddles. Their faces had that careful neutrality you get at funerals and board meetings. Pack men, the kind who smiled with their eyes closed. "Evening, Kai," the tallest said, like he was asking me to pass the salt. I lifted my hands because it was easier than getting a cracked rib. "If this is about the red light, I swear it was more of a suggestion." "Actually," he said, "it's about suggestions in general." They moved fast. Not like a rush, but like a decision already made. One took my helmet, another my phone, the third tapped my pocket where I kept a knife that liked me more than it liked people. They didn't show their teeth. That would have been honest. "Am I under arrest?" I asked. "Not by us," said the tall one. "We're escorting you." Escorting usually involves champagne. Not tonight. They didn't cuff me. They didn't have to. I'd been running for years. My legs knew the hint of a leash even before it touched skin. We moved through rain like we were slicing a curtain. The precinct looked the way tired feels. Bad coffee and fluorescent pennants, steel chairs, scuffed linoleum. That metallic taste of old arguments baked into the paint. They sat me at a table under a light that hummed with a failing filament. A clock clicked too loudly. Somewhere a printer coughed like a lifelong smoker. My shirt clung to my spine, chill threading the damp through me until I could feel each vertebra as a bead on a rosary. I waited for a cop. Got a lawyer. He walked in with an umbrella folded so precisely the raindrops on it looked arranged. His suit was dark, almost blue, fitted so well it could have been a story about silence. The room changed temperature around him. Not warmer, not colder, just exact. He set a leather folio on the table. His eyes were the color of strong coffee, and the expression people save for delicate glass. "Mr. Kai." He didn't look at the packmen. He didn't need to. "I'm Ryan Tan." I leaned back. "Congratulations." He sat. He didn't offer a hand. "You've been busy." Everyone needs a hobby. He opened the folio and slid a single sheet toward me. The paper wasn't quite paper. It had a grain too fine, like it would bruise if you touched it wrong. The ink shimmered faintly. Maybe a trick of the light, maybe not. "This is a way out," he said. "You leave here tonight with no charges filed, no outstanding warrants, and no immediate pack interference. Miracles already?" I arched a brow. "What's the price of salvation, counselor?" He didn't smile. "Acknowledgement of responsibility. Which means, sign," he said, "and you'll be under my protection. Which legally is also my ownership. For 1 year." I laughed because it was either that or throw the chair. "You make that sound like a gym membership." "It's a contract," he said mildly. "Not a cage. Unless you try to break it." The tall packman shifted his weight toward the door. He was being respectful, which is what people call it when they've already decided your future. "Look," I said, "I'm flattered you want a house pet, but—" Ryan placed a pen next to the page. His fingers were steady. "You can walk out in 15 minutes with me," he said. "Or you can wait for the officers to process the paperwork the pack filed. You know how that ends." I did. Illegal racing. Tampering with tracking marks. Harboring runaway omegas. Nothing proved. Everything suspected. The pack liked examples. The city loved theater. I stared at the paper until the words steadied. There was a line for my name. A space where the date smirked. Underneath, a clause so short it was a fence pretending to be mercy. My heart thudded, slow and mean. For years, I'd told others not to sign the papers shoved under their noses. Run first, Ask later. But I was tired in a way sleep wouldn't touch, tired of sprinting from rooms before the doorframe learned my scent. Tired of kissing pavement and calling it freedom. Tell me the catch, I said. All of it. Ryan's gaze didn't waver. On paper, a year. In practice, until I say I'm satisfied. I barked a laugh that hurt on the way out. Do you always order your cages in velvet? My job is clarity, he said. Not comfort. The rain thickened against the window. A drop found its way down the glass like a slow tear. My throat tasted like ozone. Fine, I said, because the night had already chose its ending. Let's dance. I reached for the pen. The metal was cool, heavier than it looked, balanced the way weapons are. I pressed it to the line. It bit. Not the pen, the page. A sting spiked my fingertip. One bright bead welled, slid, and broke across the grain. It soaked in with a whisper like breath on a neck. The room breathed with it. The lights pulled in, then let go. Somewhere far inside my ribs, something unclenched, and something else took its place. It wasn't pain exactly, it was knowing. The scent rose, thin and iron sweet. Blood, mine. Not sprayed, not spilled. Invited. I signed. The ink drank the letters with a satisfied hush. Heat licked my wrist, a ring of warmth tightening to a thread. I hissed, instinct tugging my arm back. But the thread sank deeper, silky, and relentless. Until I could feel it tug once. Twice. Like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. What the hell? I looked down. On the inside of my wrist, just below the pulse, a mark unfurled like a sigh. A thin line curving into a scale, then a second line balancing it. Not scales of a fish, scales of judgment. Ryan's voice came quiet, precise. The blood contract is now in force. You're under my protection. His eyes held mine, and in my possession. For a year, I snorted. Too quickly to be brave. I'm bought. Without gift wrap. His mouth almost curved. I don't raise my voice, Mr. Kai, I don't raise my hand, I raise terms. Keep them, and you'll find I'm an excellent shield. Break them, and you'll learn I'm an even better cage. Something in my chest pawed the bars. Humor was a habit, not a cure. I flexed my fingers. The mark shivered and settled. Not angry, just awake. What counts as breaking? I asked. Lying, he said. Endangering yourself. Running. You make it sound like I'm allergic to honesty. He tilted his head. Are you? The question slid under my skin in a way hands never had. I swallowed. The air tasted like stainless steel, like rain and old paper and a breath I'd been holding for a year too long. I didn't read it, I said. The truth scraped going out. Is that part of the trick? Get the fox to sign the trap he can't smell? No trick. He closed the folio, and set the pen exactly parallel to its edge. Just an agreement. Which we will keep to the letter. Lawyer humor. I wrinkled my nose. Terrifying. The packmen shifted again, impatient, like dogs at a handler's heel. Ryan didn't look at them. He stood, and somehow the room stood with him. Come, he said, not harsh. Not soft, just inevitable. I'll take you home. That's your word for kennel? For shelter, he said. And for the place where we discuss rules. I don't follow rules. You will follow mine, he said calmly. You aren't required to want to. Only to comply. It wasn't a threat. That made it worse. Threats flare and fade. Terms stay. I rose because there was nowhere left to sit that didn't smell like choices. The rain hit us again in the doorway, heavy enough to drum meaning into my shoulders. He held the umbrella over both of us, and for one stunned second, I forgot what to do with the simple geometry of kindness. Outside the city steamed. Neon smeared into the river where the street should have been. We crossed to a dark sedan that wore its shine like armor. He opened the passenger door for me. Old-fashioned, or precise. I slid in because I was cold, and because the mark on my wrist warmed when he was close, which felt like an insult and a relief. He drove like he argued, without raising his voice. The wipers kept time with my pulse. My reflection in the window looked like a rumor I'd heard about myself. Wolfish eyes, wet hair stuck to my cheekbones, grin gone. What happens now? I asked, watching the city lift and fold around us. Now, he said. You sleep. I don't sleep well in cages. He didn't look over. Then it's fortunate, I said. Shelter. I almost smiled. Almost. We climbed into the sky, tires whispering on the curve of a ramp that coiled toward a stack of glass and light. His building bit the rain in clean angles. Inside, the air smelled like nothing, which is its own kind of rich. The elevator purred. The doors opened on a room that matched his voice. Neat, held, spare. No family pictures. No shoes out of place. No life, except for the view. The city spread under glass like something he'd argued into submission. Rules, he said, setting the folio down. We'll cover them in the morning. You really believe I'll be here in the morning? He met my eyes then, and I learned a new shade of quiet. Not blank, not cold, just utterly sure. When I looked up, I would tell myself later, his eyes weren't lit with threat, but with something worse. A certainty that he wouldn't let me go. The elevator opened on silence, so clean, it felt sterilized. If houses had personalities, his was a restraining order. Glass, steel, and that expensive kind of emptiness that hums like electricity. The air smelled like nothing. No cologne, no food, no human residue. It was the kind of space that didn't just reject clutter. It denied the concept of living. Nice, I said, stepping inside and dragging wet footprints across the polished floor. Minimalist or recently divorced? Ryan's mouth didn't even twitch. I prefer efficiency. Efficiency, I repeated. Right. That's what they call loneliness, with a cleaning service. He took my jacket and hung it on a hook that looked too sharp for fabric. My fingers itched to leave fingerprints somewhere inappropriate, just to prove I existed. From the wall-to-wall windows, the city blinked below us. Miles of electric arteries pulsing in rain. The glass caught our reflections. One composed man in a charcoal suit, and one damp mistake with a mouth too fast for his own good. This way, he said, crossing the living room. Everything he owned looked like it came with a non-disclosure agreement. A black leather couch, a desk too clean to trust, a bookshelf lined with legal volumes that all seemed to glare at me. I trailed him to a guest room that looked like it had never hosted anyone, unless he occasionally entertained statues. Here, he gestured. You'll sleep here. The kitchen is stocked, bathroom down the hall, and... He turned to face me. That tone he used, like commas had military rank, clicked something behind my ribs. Rules, I said flatly. Go ahead, your lawfulness. That earned the smallest lift of an eyebrow. 1. You cannot lie. The contract prevents it. If you attempt to, you'll feel discomfort. Discomfort, I echoed. What kind? Rash? Spontaneous regret? He ignored me. 2. You will comply with direct orders from me. That is the essence of ownership. 3. Endangering yourself or me will trigger the bond's corrective effect. Corrective effect, I muttered. Sounds kinky. His eyes flicked to mine, steady as a verdict. Don't test it. I folded my arms. Let me guess. Obedience is happiness. No, he said. Obedience is survival. The words landed colder than I expected. For a moment, I almost asked what had taught him to say that so quietly. Instead, I went for the obvious provocation. I'm not going to obey you. The world pulsed. A hot needle drove through my chest, not agony, but a searing warmth that crawled along my veins. I gasped and gripped the edge of the bed. Ryan didn't move. I said, obliged, not willing. He murmured. There's a legal difference. Significant in this case. Legal difference, I hissed through clenched teeth. You're really the worst kind of sadist. I'm a lawyer, he said. Precision isn't cruelty. Feels the same. The pain eased as quickly as it came, leaving only a dull echo. I straightened, scowling. So the contract just zaps me whenever you don't like my tone? Not quite. He adjusted his tie, calm as a man explaining tax codes. It only reacts to defiance that violates an explicit term. Your tone, unfortunately, is not yet illegal. Yet, I said. Glad to know I have some constitutional rights. I'm sure you'll test their limits. Oh, I will, I said sweetly. He turned away, and I couldn't tell if that meant dismissal or faith. The line between the two seemed thinner around him. I wandered after him into the kitchen, because silence was his comfort, and therefore my weapon. He filled a kettle, his movements measured and economical, like he'd litigated gravity into compliance. You always this fun at parties? I asked. I don't attend parties. Of course you don't. Steam began to rise. He reached for 2 mugs. White porcelain, no pattern, no joy. The sound of water pouring hit the air like a sigh too polite to complain. When he handed me one, I noticed it. A slight tremor in his right hand. Barely there, but real. He saw me notice. The tremor stopped. The mask clicked back into place. Tea, he said simply. Your hospitality overwhelms me. I took the mug, sniffed. Chamomile? You're trying to sedate me. It helps with tension. Mine or yours? He didn't answer, which ironically told me plenty. We sat across from each other at a small glass table, and I hated how civilized it looked. My reflection in the surface stared back, a wolf in a stranger's den. So, about this contract, I said, stirring the tea though there was nothing to stir. Does it come with dental benefits, days off, a sense of dignity? His gaze stayed on me. Unreadable. You're remarkably articulate for someone who didn't read what he signed. Yeah, well, some of us read people instead. And what do you read now? I tilted my head. A man who thinks control is the same as safety. He didn't flinch, but his eyes flickered. A ripple behind still water. I prefer structure, he said quietly. It keeps things from breaking. I leaned back, smirking. How's that working out for you? His lips thinned, but the corner of his mouth almost curved. You're an irritating omega. I'm an exceptional omega, I corrected. There's a difference. Significant, in this case. For the first time, he actually smiled. It was small, reluctant, like it had been cross-examined before being allowed out. The air between us changed. Warmer, dangerous in a softer way. I hated that I noticed. You may call me Ryan, he said after a moment. What happened to Mr. Tan? I reserve that for clients. And what am I? He took a slow sip of tea. An ongoing case. Fascinating. Hope you lose? I rarely do. The kettle clicked again behind him, a tiny punctuation mark in our stalemate. I set my mug down. So what if I just walk out that door? You'll feel the contract pull, he said. You might make it halfway down the hall before it drags you back. Drag me back how? By guilt? By pain? I tried to laugh it off. It came out shaky. Good thing I have a high tolerance. I doubt that, he said. But, we'll see. He stood, gathering both mugs and rinsing them in the sink. Not even a drop of tea splashed. Of course not. He probably alphabetized raindrops. You can rest, he said without turning around. There's clothing in the closet. I'll have paperwork for you in the morning. Paperwork? To define your duties. Define this. I grabbed the nearest pillow from the pristine couch and threw it at him. It hit his shoulder, bounced, and landed on the immaculate floor. He didn't even look, just adjusted his glasses. Property damage clause, he murmured. We'll need to add that. I stood there, half annoyed, half something else. He wasn't like any alpha I'd met. No bark, no threat display. Just that terrible steadiness. Like the world would eventually rearrange itself to his logic. Which made me want to break it more. You're impossible, I said finally. Unlikely, he corrected. But not impossible. The clock in the living room ticked. A soft, relentless rhythm. The kind that fills space but doesn't belong to it. He left me standing there, still wet, still defiant, still buzzing with that strange current that wasn't quite anger. I wandered back into the guest room, flopped on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. The mark on my wrist pulsed faintly in the dark. Not pain, just presence. Through the glass wall, I could see the city bleeding light into the rain. Somewhere in the apartment, Ryan moved. Quiet, efficient, as though every step had precedent. He didn't shout. Didn't threaten. Didn't even look satisfied with his victory. And that was what made it worse. Because I couldn't stop thinking about the calm that wrapped around him like a second skin. So absolute, it felt like gravity. I wanted to dig my fingers into it, tear a hole, see what he looked like when he bled emotion instead of clauses. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind replayed the warmth that had burned through my chest when I said I wouldn't obey, and the way his voice had threaded through it. Controlled, certain, infuriatingly gentle. I'd spent years outrunning alphas who barked commands. Now I'd signed myself to one who didn't need to bark at all. When I finally drifted off, the last thought that crawled through my head was bitter and amused at once. Maybe I hadn't just signed a contract. Maybe I'd stepped into cross-examination. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I wanted to win. I woke before the city did, and decided his order needed fingerprints. His apartment had a conference table, of course it did. A glossy slab of glass that looked like it billed by the hour. I curled up on it like a cat that had made a hostile takeover. The glass was cold against my cheek, and my breath fogged a small crescent that kept refreezing. Somewhere past the windows, dawn bled gray into the rain. Ryan found me there at 6:30, perfectly on schedule, as if he'd subpoenaed the sunrise. "This is not a bed," he said. "It is, when you're tired enough." I stretched, spine popping, surprisingly comfortable. "Unforgiving, like your personality." He adjusted his cuffs. "You have a perfectly suitable room. I prefer common areas. Makes it easier to be a common problem." His gaze flicked to the faint, oily smudge my hair had left on the glass. He didn't sigh. He didn't reprimand. He placed his leather folio on the far edge, like we were beginning a meeting. Which, in a way, we were. "Breakfast will arrive in 20 minutes, he said. "Ordered?" "Of course. Heaven forbid you meet a stove unsupervised." He regarded me with that courtroom stillness. "I can cook." "Let me guess," I said, sliding off the table. "Poached eggs, you time with a metronome." His mouth threatened a smile and abstained. "Shower. Then clothes." "We have a schedule." I took my time showering, mostly because I knew he would note it. In his closet, don't ask why I wandered there, I wanted to see what a man like him wore when no one was watching. I found a small forest of pristine shirts. I touched the nearest one. Satin weave cotton, soft in the same way betrayal is soft. You don't feel the edge until it's already parting you. I put it on. The fabric fell against my skin with infuriating correctness. The collar sat neat against my throat. I rolled the sleeves, left the top 2 buttons undone, and padded back to the kitchen barefoot, tracking Rebel's wet footprints over his immaculate floor. He looked up from his phone, eyes scanning the shirt, then my face. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. "I'm borrowing," I said. "Consider it your contribution to the arts. Return it clean. Try and stop me your lawfulness." He went very still, which on him meant microscopic movement. "Don't call me that. Then stop earning it." Breakfast was exactly as expected, efficient, nutritious, joyless. He ate standing at the counter, reading a brief. I ate sprawled on a stool, kicking the lower rung, trying to find the note that would make his composure crack. "Schedule for today?" I asked, around a mouthful of perfectly lawful granola. "You'll review a list of tasks," he said. "We will establish routines. Structure reduces risk. Structure suffocates wolves." "You're not a wolf," he said. That got me. I set the spoon down, metal ticking. "I am what I choose to be." His eyes lifted from the brief to pin mine. "Then choose to live." Something in my chest snarled. Something else listened. "At least teach your cage some manners," I muttered, hopping off the stool. "It doesn't smell like anything in here." "That's unnatural." "Scents cause distraction," he said. "They linger." "Exactly." I grinned and slipped his door code, the way I'd watched his fingers do it earlier. His head turned, surprised. "I'm going out." "You'll remain on the property," he said. "I'll remain adjacent to the property." I waggled the empty granola bowl at him. "Gotta return this to the ecosystem." Outside, the building's covered drive was a mirror of his lungs. Controlled intake, controlled release. Rain rattled at the edge like a hand on a locked gate. The gate itself kept the city out, and the rich in. Except for the family that lived under the awning, a mother mutt with wary eyes, 2 pups wobbling on oversized paws. They slept in a nest of delivery boxes, and the blank space of other people's attention. I crouched and whistled softly. The mother lifted her head, measuring me. I held out a palm, flat and slow, and reached into the paper bag I'd smuggled from the kitchen. Scrambled eggs. Paid for, not stolen, even my chaos has accounting. "Breakfast, ma'am," I said, and slid the plate closer with the reverence I reserve for engines and bruised hearts. A tiny thing edged out from behind her, all ribs and elbows, with a face too serious for its size. When he sniffed my hand and did not bite, my chest did something I didn't approve of. "Hello, Precedent," I told him, because everything here seemed to require legal metaphors. He sneezed and sneezed again, solemn as a judge. "Don't name strays." Ryan's voice came from behind me, crisp as a folded verdict. He named himself. I didn't turn. The mother had decided my offering was acceptable, and the pups were now committing to the eggs with wholehearted abandon. Besides, Precedent suits him. Small, but binding. "Don't feed them," he said, stepping to my side, umbrella sheltering both of us without him appearing to notice the proximity. "We'll attract more. That's the point." He watched me, for a long breath. Not a stare, an assessment, the kind you give a cliff before you jump. Rain hissed at the edges of the awning. "Inside," he said finally. "Make me." I felt it before he spoke. Heat threading from the mark on my wrist to the rest of me, a warm pressure, not pain. The contract listening. The bond cocking its head. "Kai." His tone didn't rise. "Inside?" I stood, slow, letting defiance arc my spine. The warmth built, collecting like thunder, not unbearable, but very clear whose weather this was. I went inside. He closed the door. The silence was an insult. I wanted to throw something at it. The office was a cathedral to control, glass desk aligned with the window. Geometry, books arranged by subject, then jurisdiction, then year. I walked in as a declaration, and draped my leather jacket over the back of his chair. Then, with exaggerated care, I planted my boots on the pale floor, leaving damp signatures like fingerprints on a confession. "Your sense of territory is interesting," he said, crossing to his desk. He lifted my jacket, and placed it on the coat tree without looking at me. "If this is your idea of training," I said, "where are my treats? Perform first." I laughed, genuinely. "And I thought you didn't do humor." "I don't," he said. "I do accuracy. You should try living. Rumor says it's messy. I prefer solvable problems." "Then you shouldn't have signed me." I leaned my hips against the edge of his desk, crowding his space on purpose. "I'm a long, unsolved mystery with good hair." He looked up at that. The ceiling light carved a line along his cheekbone. There it was again, the faint tremor in his right hand as he set a fountain pen down. He folded his fingers together to still it. I pretended not to see and saw all the same. We stared at each other long enough for my pulse to start measuring the silence. The bond hummed, low as a warning light. "New rule," he said. "Don't sit on my desk." "I'm not sitting. I'm leaning." "Don't lean on my desk." "Why?" I asked, all innocence. "Because it's mine," he said. "Then make me move." The warmth in my chest leapt, amber to orange. It didn't hurt, it insisted. The mark on my wrist pulsed. I swallowed against the urge to grab my sternum just to anchor myself. He didn't move. His control radiated like heat from a road on a summer day, making the air shimmer. "You are not required to want," he said, enunciating each word like a cornerstone. "Only to comply." "And you," I said, smiling without showing a single tooth, "are not required to assume that I will." The bond flared. Not a shock. A bloom. Heat rolled up my arms like sunlight through veins, sweet and savage, flooding my throat with something that tasted like lightning. My knees tightened reflexively. Instinct screamed to run. Defiance decided to stay. He held my gaze. "Kai, you going to turn up the thermostat inside me until I faint?" I asked. "That your game?" "I don't play games." I noticed. He exhaled, and the room seemed to do it with him. Step away from the desk. The heat pressed again, firmer. I imagined the mother dog outside, her head between her paws, waiting for the storm to pass. I pushed off the desk, as if it were my idea, and strolled to the bookcase. tracing a finger down spines that had probably never been smudged. "Your cage," I said softly, "is too clean." "It's a home," he said. "It's a verdict." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The clock on the wall counted things no one had time for. A ragged minute stretched. I wanted him to shout. I wanted him to crack so I could see what color his anger was. Instead, he moved to the window and looked down at the drive where the family of strays were finishing their feast. "Security will complain," he said. "Let them file a motion." He almost smiled. "You are tiring." "I prefer invigorating. It's more medical." "Tiresome then. Legally speaking, now you're just flirting." He turned back, and even from across the room I could feel the shift in him. Not anger, not victory, strain. If composure had bones, his were hairline fracturing. "Why do you do this?" he asked. "Because if I don't make a mess, I disappear," I said, before I could stop the truth from walking out of my mouth. It surprised both of us. The bond warmed, a pleased purr. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His hand touched the edge of his desk, and found it steady. Mine found a book that hadn't asked to be touched and left it a fraction of an inch askew. We made it until afternoon without further fireworks. He reviewed contracts. I invented new ways to annoy furniture. At 3, I sprawled on his couch with my boots on, reading a case file upside down. "That is privileged information," he said, without looking. "It's upside down," I said. "Even my crimes are considerate. You are not to read client files. I am not to obey, remember?" His eyes lifted. "You are obliged to obey." "Ah, the legal difference." I cocked my head. Significant, in this case. There it was again, the twitch at the corner of his mouth. It infuriated me that I liked causing it. The fight came in the late evening, as fights do, because darkness makes honesty look like a dare. I had found another of his shirts, and was wearing it like a victory flag. He was pouring tea, and the tremor was back, small as a confession. "Stop wearing my clothes," he said. "Make me," I said, and smiled with my eyes. The warmth hit faster this time. The bond had learned my edges and slid along them with expert pressure. I swallowed, breathing carefully. He set the teapot down with excessive gentleness, as if the table might take it personally. "Don't push," he said. "Don't pretend you're a wall," I shot back. "You're a door you keep locking from the inside." "Enough." "No," I said. "Not until you admit you want something other than compliance." The heat surged, through me, through the room, and then shifted so suddenly I almost staggered. It wasn't mine alone. It rebounded, echoing through the bond, and I felt it in him. Not anger. Ache. Like a muscle held too tight for too long, finally protesting. He reached for the back of the chair, missed, and sat down hard. One hand pressed flat against his sternum. His eyes were open and steady, but a flush climbed his throat like guilt. I froze. "Ryan?" He closed his eyes once, deliberate, and opened them again. "I'm fine. You're not." I crossed the space before the word could burn us both, and crouched in front of him, palms hovering, not touching. The bond throbbed between us, like a warning beacon in thick fog. "It's bilateral," he said, the calm returning by sheer force of will. "The contract. When you resist, I feel the counterforce. It's intended to discourage escalation." Intended by whom? Sadists with fountain pens? By people who didn't want war. He drew a careful breath. "We are unlikely to satisfy their design." I swallowed the stupid urge to apologize and turned it into a sneer. "So every time I push, you—" "Yes," he said. And the admission cost him. "And every time I push, you do." That seems fair. It didn't. It felt like a mirror held to a wound. Silence feathered down around us. Rain clawed the windows. Somewhere below, a small dog barked twice, quick and proud. Precedent, making his case. "Look at me," I said. He did. Up close, his eyes were even darker, depths where arguments go to drown. I hated the part of me that wanted to jump. "I'm not trying to break you," I said. "I'm trying to find where you end. And if I don't, then I'll be very disappointed," I said lightly. Because anything else would have opened something I wasn't ready to name. He huffed the ghost of a laugh. You're infuriating. I'm invigorating, I corrected. Legally speaking. Get your boots off my carpet, he said, and some small normal thing in his voice steadied the room. I sat back on my heels, exhaled, and then stood. If this is your idea of training, I said over my shoulder as I headed for the door, where are my treats? Incentives are earned. Watch me earn them. Kai. I paused in the doorway, hand on the frame. You are not required to want, he said, tone even again, the courtroom rebuilt. Only to comply. I turned, smile sharp and real. And you're not required to assume that I will. This time when the bond warmed, it wasn't a flare. It was a low, persistent heat, like coals, banked for later. I left his office with my jacket still on his coat tree, my footprints drying on his perfect floor, and the ridiculous comfort of knowing a small dog slept full-bellied under our roofline. I was angry. I was curious. And under all of it, in the place where running usually lived, something else had started to pace. It wasn't obedience. But it wasn't the door either. The first time it happened, I thought I was imagining it. A tremor that wasn't mine. A breath that hitched in a chest that wasn't under my ribs. Not pain, temperature. Like putting my hand above a stove and feeling where the heat thickens. It started small. A flicker of unease. The way a room feels when a picture hangs 1 inch crooked. I paused halfway down the hall, listening for footsteps. For the soft order of Ryan moving through his routines. Nothing. Just the whisper of the air system and the rain at the windows, sketching long hands down the glass. I touched my wrist. The mark was quiet. A thin, weightless line. I told myself I was projecting. Wolves, fine, omegas, pick up moods, mirroring is survival. But then the flicker sharpened, and for a heartbeat I tasted something metallic on my tongue, alarm. Not mine. I followed it the way you follow music you can't admit you like. Into his office, washed in warm lamplight and the color of late hours. Ryan sat at the desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled, tie loosened just enough for a human being to live. Papers were arranged in a geometry of calm. His eyes tracked a line of text, and didn't track away. The feeling softened, settled. Relief. Again, not mine. I slid into the chair opposite him without a word. A little defiance with no fireworks. He glanced up, registered me, and returned to the brief as if my presence was a natural law that had finally passed. We sat like that, not speaking, letting the warm cone of the lamp hold the space between us like hands that didn't shake. The rain drew its own conclusions on the glass. The city outside looked like a nervous system, lights pulsing along unfamiliar pathways. It should have been cold, that kind of silence. It wasn't. The bond hummed, low and even. I could feel his focus, precise and layered, like watching someone stack cards into a house without breathing too hard. Beneath it, the faintest tension, the tremor I'd pretended not to notice earlier settling along his right hand. He kept it still by will alone. What are you reading? I asked eventually. He didn't answer right away. Ryan answers when he finishes the sentence he's on. Then he looked up, and the lamplight put a thin gold thread down the bridge of his nose. An appeal, he said. Contract dispute. The pack pushed a bond through with irregular consent. Irregular consent, I echoed. You mean coercion? Yes, he said. But we do not write that in the filing. We should. His mouth moved, like a thought brushed the inside of it. We should, he said, quiet. And still, we don't. We studied each other over the rim of that admission. The warm feeling in my chest wasn't the contract. It was recognition, the kind that stings first and heals later. You're very still, I said. It helps, he said. With what? He considered. Containment. Of what? I could have asked. Instead, I tried the truth. It had been asking for air lately. I can feel you, I said. Sometimes. Little spikes, cold, then warm. Like weather changes. His eyes didn't widen. They never did. But the space behind them shifted, the way a field moves under wind. It's a side effect, he said. Of the contract? So it's not my imagination. No. He paused. It is not. Does it go both ways? Yes. And you felt me when I was, what, annoying? Alive, he said. And then something like a smile met the line of his mouth and passed through without catching. And yes, annoying. Good, I said, leaning back, letting the chair creak just to offend the room. I enjoy being a civic experience. You're not a public service. I'm public danger. He didn't disagree. The lamp made the shadows of his fingers long across the desk. A drop of rain found a downstroke on the window, and committed to it. Tell me something true, I said. He folded his hands, the tremor gone for now, the bones of his knuckles like pale punctuation. You already know more truths than is healthy. Then add one, I said. For balance. He looked at me long enough for the silence to grow an opinion. Then he set his pen down, and very deliberately turned the page of the brief face down, as if to bar the document from listening. Once, he said, I made a mistake. There are dozens of ways to say I failed. Lawyers don't use most of them. He chose the one that was a confession, not a defense. An omega, he continued. A client. She signed a bond under duress. I found a loophole. It should have been enough. I argued for a stay, for time to relocate her to a safer house. I trusted the letter of the order to be obeyed. And it wasn't, I said, because the weather inside me had already turned. The metallic taste again. An old storm in an old field. It was delayed, he said. The words were precise, but the voice was not. The pack moved faster. They retrieved her that night. There was an incident. In the morning, there was no plaintiff left to represent. I swallowed. The room smelled like paper and heat, and the tiniest iron thread tying my heartbeat to his. Her name? Leah, he said, almost not out loud. We let the name rest. I let it put its weight on my tongue so it would not slide off like a statistic. He watched me do it, and something in his shoulders dropped a fraction, like a verdict had finally arrived. The bond warmed between us, not punitive. Recognition again, shared and almost gentle. Since then, he said, I keep the law exactly. I specify terms clearly. I do not rely on favors, implication, or goodwill. I do not assume. You don't feel, I said softly. His gaze landed on me like a hand you expect to be cold, and isn't. That's not true. You feel, I said. You just don't let it touch the ground. The tremor visited his fingers, and left. He breathed in, and put it somewhere no one could find. The law is the ground, he said. If I stand on anything else, it gives way. Maybe, I said, the ground is a person. He didn't look away. Then you'd better be very steady, Mr. Kai. I should have laughed. I didn't. The rain halved itself, and doubled again. The city rewired. You're hiding, I said, finally giving the truth its appetite. Not behind law. Behind guilt. Schissoament. Filament in the lamp popped, and recovered. Too fast to fail. The bond blinked hot once. No pain. More like a flare, yes. I had the word right. It cut me on the way out, and cut him on the way in. His throat moved. He didn't defend himself. He didn't say irrelevant. He didn't say sustained or overruled. He let the sentence sit in the room with us. The third chair finally full. Perhaps, he said. And the word was the quietest thing I'd ever heard him allow. The heat in my chest fizzed. Immediate as a bruise you press to see if it still hurts. Something in me wanted to touch him. I didn't. I curled my fingers against my knee, and felt the mark's small thrum like a pulse against the tip of my thumb. We breathed. The clock on the wall tried not to intrude, and failed. Outside, a small shape hopped into the smear of the portico light, and sat on its haunches. The pup, sharp-eared, making inventory of the universe. Precedent. Conducting his survey. Ryan followed my glance to the window, and a shadow of something almost like fondness brushed his face. It startled me. That he had an expression left that didn't go through a courtroom first. You fed them again, he said. They're under our roofline. That makes them ours, I said. That is not how property law works. Good thing we're not talking about property. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. The movement closed the distance enough that I could feel his steadiness, the way a river carries silence. We're talking about things you pretend not to want. What do you think those are? He asked, and it wasn't a trap. Mess, I said. Smell. Company. A life that doesn't fit under a clause. Me. The bond pulsed, heat stroking once along the line of my chest, like approval too honest to hide. He closed his eyes like sunlight had found him. When he opened them, the coffee dark looked a degree softer. That's inconvenient, he murmured. For who? For my schedule. I smiled without aiming it like a weapon. I can disrupt that. I'm aware. We sat in that not cold quiet until the document on his desk decided to cough at us by existing. He reached for it. I watched his hand hover. Fingers steady now. The air shifted. Ourselves returning to ourselves. The room felt smaller suddenly. Comfortable things do. Right before you run. I got up, the chair scratching 2 inches across the rug. The bond stirred, alert. Where are you going? He asked. Out, I said automatically, the old script rising. For a walk. For air. To prove I still can. He looked at my wrist, not the mark, but the skin around it, the part that doesn't think of itself as belonging to anyone. It's raining. I have a hood. Kai. The bond tightened before he finished my name. Not a choke. A leash, snapping. Heat knifed through the space between my ribs, bright and blinding, then blurred into pressure. My breath hitched. Don't run, the magic said, in a voice that was mine and wasn't. I grinned through it, teeth bared at an empty room. Is this the part where you crank the thermostat until I roll over? He rose. The chair left a perfect square of shadow on the carpet, like an absence you could measure. Stop. Make me, I said. Because the echo of our earlier fights is a road even when you don't want to take it. The pressure sharpened, then turned, hard left. I felt it in my knees, the way you feel a car begin to skid. Something faltered across the bond, not toward me. From him. Ryan's breath hitched. His face, perfectly schooled, went open for 1/fraction of 1 second. And then, he was on his knees. Not collapsing. Choosing the ground because it was closer than the fall. One hand folded against his sternum. The other, flattening on the carpet like he could slow the spin by asking it politely. His suit looked wrong there. Expensive and human and hurt. The heat in me rerouted. Shock cooling it. Ryan? He inhaled once, deliberate, face angled down to protect anonymity. Don't. He said, so quietly I had to lean to hear it. Don't go. It hurts you? I asked, though my body had already answered. Every inch of the bond thrummed like wire under tension. Every time you pull against it. He lifted his head just enough for me to see his eyes, not furious, not ashamed, bare. It hurts. Not because of the contract, he said. And the truth of that sentence, lit through the bond, like electricity. Because it's you. I swallowed. Thunder rolled slow-grained along the windows. The pup barked once below, tinny and valiant. The office smelled like warm paper and rain and something that might have been my fear melting into something else. Get up, I said. Because I didn't know how to touch him without breaking both of us. Please. He did. The way he did everything. By orders you couldn't see. He moved to the edge of the desk and leaned against it. Not because he needed to, but because the human body sometimes negotiates with gravity. I don't want to cage you, he said, voice steadying. I need you alive. I laughed a little. The sound scraped thin. That's not the same as wanting me free. His hand tightened on the desk's edge. It could be. If you stayed, lightning traced the distance between us without touching either. The bond, the damn bond, warmed in assent. The dangerous way your own blood will testify against you. You're asking, I said, astonished into softness. Not ordering. I'm learning, he said simply. That was what did it. Not the pain, not the lamp blue night, not the story of Leah coiled like a wire around his ribs. The asking. Something in me that had been pacing for years lay down and listened to the rain. I took a step toward the door, purely to feel the pull. It came, hot, possessive, sincere. I took a step back. It eased, like a hand unclenching. I looked at him. If I'd known you reacted like this when I tried to run, I said, aiming for a joke, because I'm an idiot who laughs near cliffs. I would have run more often. Don't, he said. And it wasn't an order. It was a plea, wearing a lawyer's shoes. Okay, I said. The word surprised both of us. It hung there, ridiculous as a white flag, in a room built for closing arguments. Okay, I repeated, because the second time makes it real. I'll stay. For a beat. Nothing in him moved. Then the tiniest breath, like a valve releasing. The bond warmed, not a leash now, not heat you fight, hearth heat. The kind that sticks to your clothes and follows you to bed. Tea? He asked, because he's a coward in very specific, very civilized ways. Only if it's the sedative kind, I said, and sat back down where I'd started, as if the room had rewound and edited itself kinder. He poured. The slight tremor visited, then departed, invited, and fed. We drank in the complicated quiet that happens when two people have stepped off a cliff and discovered the air there is, in fact, holding. You can tell me more about Leah, I said, not because I needed to hear it tonight, but because I wanted him to know I'd still be in the chair tomorrow. Another time, he said. And what he meant was, thank you. We didn't move for a while. Rain laid its palm against the windows, and left it there. The city's lights dimmed, like they were letting us speak. When the hour got too late for questions, he closed the brief, and stood. I stood too, and for a second, we were very close. I could feel the gravity of him, the thin magnetic pull that had nothing to do with magic, and everything to do with the person carrying it. Good night, Kai, he said. Good night, your lawfulness, I said. Because change is incremental, and teasing is a language. He didn't correct me. He just watched me cross the doorway, and, I swear, let out another quiet that sounded suspiciously like relief. I went to my room. I didn't lock the door. The mark at my wrist rested like a coin under skin. Outside, down in the portico, a small dog curled into the shape of a comma and fell asleep at the end of our sentence. I lay awake a long time, listening for footsteps I wasn't planning to run from. The summons came wrapped in an email that pretended to be polite. Ryan read it twice, which meant it mattered. His mouth thinned. The lamplight gave him a courtroom halo. I was on the couch with my feet up, studiously not reading a brief he'd left open. Field trip? I asked. Counsel, he said. The PAX theater department. He closed the file, spine aligning with the desk edge like breath with ribs. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not antagonize, you will not. Be myself, I said. Got it. He didn't smile. He adjusted his tie, and, after a fraction of a second, loosened it instead. Stay close. The council chamber was built to intimidate, which is to say it was built by people who thought height and darkness could do what truth could not. The ceiling swallowed sound. The walls were the old sigils, wolves etched in iron, balanced scales engraved into black stone as if weight itself were law. The air was 10 degrees colder than outside, the kind of cold that pretends to be impartial. There were 12 seats on the dais, half filled, which felt worse than a full quorum. Like absence had been weaponized. I clocked the faces that had tried to dismantle me by rumor and procedure. They didn't look at me. They looked through me. Ryan stood at the bar like a patient storm. I stood a pace behind and to his right, where the contract made the heat run less sharply along my bones. The mark at my wrist hushed, attentive. Mr. Tan, said the center seat. Elias, old money, older grudges. You've acquired property. Ryan's voice, when it arrived, could have cut glass. I've assumed responsibility. Semantics, Elias said. Precision, Ryan said. Significant, in this case. A ripple of annoyance across the dais. I almost smiled. My tongue burned a little, the way it does when you want to speak, and the contract knows it should keep you from making art out of self-harm. Your omega, a woman 2 seats down said, rolling omega into something both sweet and small, is a known element? Define known, Ryan said. Street racing, evasion, tampering with pack marks. She pretended to consult a paper that didn't need reading, and, most concerning, facilitating the disappearance of bonded omegas. Ah, there it was. The room smelled like metal, like a name being sharpened. Ryan didn't turn, he didn't have to. I felt him arrive at the real topic, the way you feel a car downshift before a hill. Disappearances, he said. Or escapes? Illegal extrications from lawful unions, Elias said. Your charge is a criminal. My throat went dry. The mark warmed, not punishing, warning. I hadn't told Ryan. Not the specifics. Not the houses I'd staged as deliverance. The nights I'd driven back roads with, hands shaking on the wheel, a heartbeat in my back seat like a trapped bird. I'd told him enough to hang me, not enough to sanctify the rope. Ryan's head turned a fraction. What evidence are you presenting? We don't need evidence to evaluate character, said the woman with the sugar voice. You should try needing it, Ryan said mildly. It's a helpful habit. Regardless, Elias said, the council expects order. We expect obedience that can be seen. Tame him. He tilted his chin toward me without looking. Teach those who are watching that law bites harder than rumor. Silence thickened like blood on old wood. The bond inside me reared. Anger, bright and elegant. It would have driven me 2 steps forward if not for the thread to Ryan, which caught and held like a hand closed around mine. Ryan didn't move for a beat. Then he did something that disturbed the geometry of the room. He took 1 step away from the bar and toward the dais. He wasn't supposed to. The guard to our left shifted, then stilled at a flick of Elias's hand. Ryan's voice when it came was clean and loud enough to draw lines. I don't tame beasts, he said. I protect those others would break. Wood groaned somewhere in the spine of the chamber. Like the building disapproved. I forgot to breathe. The heat of the bond surged through me in agreement so total I had to clench my jaw to keep from saying yes out loud. Tame him, Elias repeated, softer. Or, we reconsider whether you are the correct custodian. Custodian, Ryan said. Interesting word choice. He set a sheet of paper on the bar. Here is my petition to dissolve the bond. The hum of surprise tasted good. I looked at him. The line of his shoulder, the steadiness he wore like armor cut to bone. He hadn't told me he'd filed anything. Of course he hadn't. He did his work, and then told you the result, like weather. Denied, the woman with the sugar voice said, almost gently. You know the proviso. Dissolution requires mutual consent. As it should, Ryan said. And do we have it? Elias asked, finally glancing at me as if I were a clause in small print. Ryan didn't look back. We will. The council chamber settled into a colder quiet. The legal way to say we're finished here is to speak as if nothing has happened. They did. Ryan bowed his head an exact degree. I matched him, because I am petty, not suicidal. On the way out, a low voice from the left, a beta I didn't know, murmured, You're going to lose. Ryan didn't stop. I rarely do, he said. Then this will be educational. We left the chamber and the chill that came with it. The hallway beyond smelled like old paper and old fear. Ryan's pace stayed even, precise. The bond ran warm between us, not a leash. Something like a thermos you pass between hands so the heat doesn't escape. You didn't know? He asked finally, without looking. That I set people free? My laugh came out thinner than I intended. You suspected. Now you know. He exhaled through his nose. I knew. Since when? Since I read the way your eyes tracked exits, he said. And since your first instinct was to feed the creatures that survive outside laws. You're flattering me. I'm describing you. He pressed the elevator button. The light glowed obediently. We'll need to talk to Miguel. Miguel? The magistrate most likely to entertain my arguments. The elevator arrived. We stepped inside. The doors reflected us back. 2 figures held together by proximity, and something less visible. And, to Leon. She mediated Leah's case. She owes me a favor. Thought you didn't trade in favors, I said. He stared at the floor indicator as it ticked. I don't. I collect them on behalf of other people. The apartment felt warmer when we returned, as if the city had re-entered our air on better terms. He didn't take off his jacket. He crossed to his desk, opened a drawer, and took out a single sheet of paper. The edges were already aligned with corners no one but him could see. He held it out to me. What's this? I asked, though the heat up my arm already knew. Your freedom, he said. Sign, my mouth went dry, not because of the paper, because of the word. Freedom is not complicated until someone offers it. The council denied your petition, I said. They denied mine, he said. They did not deny yours. That tremor I'd watched so carefully earlier returned and left. His hand stayed steady. Mutual consent, I am consenting. If you do too, the bond dissolves. And then? I asked. You leave, he said. He didn't flinch. Or you stay. But under no legal compulsion. The room tilted. Not physically. Morally, which is worse. I took the paper. It felt like the first contract, and not like it at all. The bond hummed, attentive. The mark on my wrist warmed, then cooled. I read the words. He'd written them. Release by mutual agreement. Plain. Clean. Not a clause more than we needed. His signature already marked the bottom, neat as a heartbeat aligned to a metric. I looked up at him. His eyes were the color of consequences accepted in advance. You'll lose, I said. Yes, he said. You don't do that. I'm learning, he said. Something in me, long and scarred and feral, sat very still. My fingers found the edge of the paper and flexed. You can be free, he said. And this time the word didn't clang. It landed softly, and waited. Say it, I said. What? Say what you want, I said. Because if I had to walk barefoot across my own honesty, so did he. He held my gaze. I want you not to run, he said. I want you alive, and I want... His jaw worked once, a muscle deciding which law to obey. I want you to choose me. No magic flared. No sudden heat. Just the bond opening like a door in a house you thought had no more rooms. I laughed, bright and mean because tenderness scares me worse than handcuffs. You lose beautifully, I said. Teach a master class. Kai? He said. I looked back at the paper, the neat lines, the easy exit, then I tore it in half. He didn't move. The sound was loud in the room. Fabric ripping would have been kinder. I tore it again, quarters, then eighths. Confetti of good behavior snowing into my hands. The mark at my wrist warmed, then steadied. I signed one contract, I said. The words came out low and level. The opposite of a shout, which made them more dangerous. The second isn't a document. The second is my choice. The pieces of paper fluttered to the floor. I let them. He watched them fall like rain he'd been waiting his whole life to get soaked by. Then carefully he removed his jacket, draped it over the back of a chair, and exhaled a breath that unclenched his whole posture. I would have framed it, he said. If you'd signed. You can frame this, I said, nudging a scrap with my toe. Title it, Irregular Consent. He huffed something like a laugh, startled and warm. The bond climbed my throat. Not heat now. Heat later. Hearth not leash. A promise to be tested tomorrow, and the day after. Now what? I asked. Now, he said. I disappoint the council. And I disappoint you? He shook his head once. You astonish me. That was so much worse than approval, that I had to look away, down at the scraps of paper shining like fish scales on the floor. My chest hurt. The good kind. The kind that means the bone is knitting. Teach me to lose like that, I said, unable to resist the blade of a joke when the room got too soft. I just did, he said. I crossed the small distance between us, before caution could draft an objection. Up close I could feel it. The gravity of him, the steadiness I'd wanted to tear since I met him now pulling me into a calmer orbit. His hand lifted, hovered, landed, light, on my wrist over the mark, not claiming. Recognizing. I'll still be difficult, I said. I'll still be precise, he said. Your rules are going to hate me. My rules, he said, are about to change. We stood there long enough for the city to cycle its lights twice. Outside, down under the portico, a small dog barked once, twice, as if to record the agreement for posterity. Precedent, Julie noted. I should inform the council, Ryan said finally. Tell them you lost, I suggested. I'll tell them we reached a settlement, he said, because he can't help himself. Right, I said, and smiled. A settlement, where the beast stays because he wants to, because he chooses to, he corrected softly. The heat in the bond answered like a yes, written under both our signatures. For once, I didn't argue with the language. I didn't need to. The paper on the floor had already said everything. We cleaned up the scraps together, hands bumping, the ordinary intimacy of shared chores making something loud in my chest go quiet. He took the pieces to the bin. I went to the window. Rain had thinned to a fine, stubborn mist. The city's veins looked less frantic. Over my shoulder I said, "If they call you in tomorrow, they will, and they ask what you've done with your property, I'll say," he replied, "that I released it. And when they ask why it's still here," he came to stand beside me, our reflections double exposed on the glass. "I'll say," he murmured, "because it wanted to be." "Careful," I said. "That sounds like feeling." "I'm learning," he said again. And this time, the tremor in his hand was gone. We stood there until the rain forgot its argument. When the clock clicked past an hour that would make tomorrow painful, he touched my elbow and said, "Sleep." "Order?" I asked. "Request," he said. "Dangerous precedent," I said. And behind us, down in the portico, a small dog sneezed like a stamp of approval. I went to my room and didn't close the door. The mark on my wrist lay warm and quiet, like a coin you keep for luck rather than debt. I lay down and listened to Ryan move through the apartment with his new, unfamiliar loss. I smiled into the pillow. Not because he'd lost. Because, for once, we both had. I slept like I hadn't in years. Not hidden. Not braced. Chosen. I woke to coffee and his shirt. The sleeve had wrinkled under my cheek sometime around dawn, and it smelled, faintly like his laundry detergent. Citrus, and something precise. The room wore early light, like a fresh verdict. No rain, just a sky that had finally decided not to argue. For a heartbeat, I reached for the bond like you reach for a bruise you've learned to live around, and felt nothing. Nothing. The contract's heat was gone, the leash cut clean, but underneath the skin where the mark had lived, a quieter warmth lingered, like coals banked under ash. Not compulsion. Continuity. I slid out of bed and padded barefoot toward the kitchen. Ryan stood at the counter, hair still damp from a shower I hadn't heard. Sleeves rolled like a promise he'd keep even if the world didn't. He was pouring coffee into 2 mugs, and the tremor I'd memorized was nowhere in sight. He looked up and did that tiny double take only people who enjoy control do when they see you wearing their shirt. "That one is new," he said. "Your closet is a non-renewable resource," I said, and yawned into my shoulder. "I'm conducting conservation efforts." He handed me a mug. My fingers brushed his, calloused in that delicate way that comes from holding pens like weapons. "Good morning," he said. Suspiciously, I agreed, sipping. It was strong, ruthless coffee, with a soft aftertaste, the kind that pretends not to care, then does. "So," I added, glancing at my wrist. "I'm unchained." He followed my gaze. The skin there looked ordinary. I didn't feel ordinary. "You're no longer bound by the contract," he said evenly. "You can leave." I let the words move through me, testing for ache. They didn't hit a wall. They mapped a door. "You know," I said, setting the mug down with exaggerated care, "I'm starting to suspect the cage was in you." He huffed a breath, almost a laugh, as if the morning had allowed him a human moment before the law reclaimed him. "Possibly," he said. "The bars were familiar." "And heavy," I said. "Yes." We stood there, in the clean hush of his kitchen, our kitchen, pretending to evaluate the toast like it had opinions. Outside, the city discovered it could be quiet. Under the portico below, a small dog barked once, punctuating the day like a judge stamping a docket. Precedent in session. "Breakfast?" he asked. "Is this a request or an order?" "A bribe," he said. The pan sizzled. He did in fact know how to cook. He just preferred not to when other people could witness it. Eggs slid into existence with the kind of civility that suggests a contract had been negotiated with the stove. We ate at the counter, shoulder to shoulder, letting ordinary time do its slow work. He finished first and reached for my plate. I slid it exactly out of reach. "I'll handle dishes," he said. "No, I'll handle dishes," I said, because nothing is more intimate. Then arguing about chores in a kitchen that used to be a courtroom. His eyebrow rose. You dislike structure. I dislike your structure. This is mine. I carried plates to the sink, turned on the water, and made a show of doing it badly. He winced. That is not how you say it's an order, I said, grinning. Go on. Live a little. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms, watching the steam curl. It's not an order. Then it's a request, I said, widening my eyes. Dangerous precedent. He ignored the bait. For 3 seconds. You know, he said, too casually. If I call this a civil partnership again, will you? I'll bite, I said sweetly. He considered. Legally. Then we'd be equal. Legally, I said. You're adorable. The corner of his mouth surrendered, just enough. Don't call me that. Then stop earning it, I said, and flicked a bubble of foam at him. It landed on his tie, which he hadn't put on yet because he was pretending not to be going to work. He wiped it off with dignified resignation, which thrilled me on a primitive level I refused to interrogate. When the plates were clean and racked with an order, he tried valiantly not to correct. I leaned on the island and watched him attempt to pretend there wasn't a question either of us had to ask. So, I said, because I'm generous, what does your counsel do when a beast decides to nap on the judge's bench? He traced a finger along the counter's edge, thinking, they revise the bylaws or pretend the incident didn't occur. They'll hate both options. Yes. Do you? He looked at me. No. The simplicity of it put a hand on my sternum and pressed, not unkindly. I walked around the island until we were close enough for ordinary gravity to do the rest. Up close, I could smell coffee and soap. And the liminal scent that was just him. A promise not written down. You're sure? I asked. No, he said honestly. I'm choosing. Good answer, I murmured, because the contract had forced honesty, and now it was a habit. I took his wrist, the one that had learned steadiness the hard way, and turned it so his palm faced mine. We stood like that, lines matching lines, pulse arguing with pulse, and then agreeing to disagree. You're still free, he said, low. If you want to go. I do, I said. He blinked. I smiled. Out. For a run. For coffee that isn't terrifying. For dog food. Dog food, he repeated, as if it were a new clause and he needed to verify its jurisdiction. For our staff attorney, I said. Small, loud, specializes in precedent. Precedent, he said, almost affectionate. Careful, I warned. That sounds like feeling. I'm learning. I kissed him because the morning had asked nicely. It was not strategic. It was not a test. It was the softest violence I knew. Mouth to mouth, patience to patience. The kind of kiss that has room for laughter in it. He exhaled against my bottom lip like relief, and I filed the sound under reproducible results. When we separated, the world had not ended. It had, annoyingly, improved. Dishes are mine tonight, I said. Contested, he said. Litigated. I intend to. We dallied another few minutes, doing nothing bravely. Then he looked at the clock in the way he always would, and I rolled my eyes in the way I always will. He took his jacket. I stole his tie and looped it around my neck like a trophy he didn't mind losing. At the door he hesitated. Not a flinch, a choice. You can leave, he said again, softer now, the legal phrasing stripped to bone. Whenever you need to. I will, I said. And meant I won't. But I'll come back. He nodded once, like the motion contained all the reckless things he wouldn't say before 9 a.m. I'll be here. Of course you will, I said. Someone has to alphabetize the rain. He opened the door. The hallway smelled like other people's mornings. Toast and shampoo and the fabric softener version of hope. I stepped out. And something in my chest that used to coil when faced with exits, didn't. I looked back. Ryan, Kai. If you call it civil partnership again. You'll bite, he said. That almost smile appearing like a signed stipulation. Duly noted. Good. I leaned in, brushed another kiss at the corner of his mouth, a signature without the blood. I'll bring back coffee. The terrifying kind. I'll make room on the docket. I took 3 steps toward the elevator before turning. Just to test the edge where habit used to be. No heat, no pull. Only that steady ember warmth, not leashing, lighting. I breathed in, and it tasted like spring trying something new. Freedom is not when no one chases you. It's when there's nowhere left to run. Because home has caught up first.